Yo, what's good, YouTube, man? It's Gary with another Fan TV back at another video. Like the content of this video, go smash that like button at the content of this channel. Go ahead, subscribe, man. Look, we'll talk about the Ravens. They're on a bye week, right? We'll talk about some trade candidates, some ideas that they could do. Because I don't believe that the Ravens are, selling the season, right? I think they have a very good reason to actually want to get some players in here. So talk about a couple of players, realistic, and a couple of, two dream scenarios that probably won't happen, but, talk about them as well. But before all of that, I do want to talk about CJGJ and his release, or I guess the mutually parting of ways, however you want to describe it, from the Ravens. And my initial thought is I'm a little disappointed, right? Listen, I know the Ravens traded for Aloy Gilman, and that had a lot to do with his decision. He wanted somewhere where he saw a clearer path to play and all of those kind of things, but be kind of honest, I thought that he could do a lot for the Ravens, right? I thought he had the type of attitude, type of swagger that the Ravens need on that defensive end. Somebody who really cares, somebody who's going to into the opponent's face. So it's pretty much, very, very similar to the Deontay Johnson thing, except for CJ Gardner Johnson, lasted 1 week on the Ravens. And, Deontay Johnson was with 2 months, couple months like that. So similar, but different at the same time. I will say that, good luck to him. It is interesting, though, to me, though, that he said that the Ravens were his only option, right? Those are words out of his mouth. So maybe he knows something that the rest of us don't. I know he wants to go back to Philly pretty desperately. He never really wanted to leave Philly, but do the higher-ups want him back? I guess is a question that we're going to have to see if that's going to be answered over this next week or so, or even later on into the season, right, for him. Like I said, I think it was a little disappointing. I don't think with Deontay Johnson, I think the Ravens did things that they didn't handle it right last season. But this year, I don't really think they did anything wrong, right? The Ravens want to run 3 safety looks, right? So Aloy Gilman is going to come out of the game. You're going to get into the game, right? People make a big deal about Malachi Starks. I think he has some struggles. I think people are overstating his struggles. But either way, you're probably rotating for him at points as well, right? So I think he was going to play. I think he was going to see some snaps. I think he got a little impatient with the opportunity, if I'm being quite honest, right? So, but he decided, I'm gonna go my separate ways. Best luck to him, right? So it is what it is on that front. All right. Now, what the main thing I want to talk about is trades, right? So, the Ravens on a bye week. I don't think the Ravens are going to be big time sellers and things like that. Yes, they're 1-5, but I came across this on Twitter. The Ravens have the 26th out of 32 ranked schedule of remaining games in the NFL, right? 26th, right? So the Ravens are way, way down low on the list, right? The strength of schedule is very, very low. All right. The Ravens, 10-7 is possibility. They really get hot, 11-6, whatever. But the Ravens have a real opportunity coming straight off with this Bears game after the bye week to really make a run. All right. So I don't think they're going to be looking to sell off a bunch of players at over this bye week and then, approaching closer to the deadline, which is next month. I believe it's November 4th, right? So we'll talk about some trade candidates, right? All right. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is that I did see a report of some trade rumors that Keaton Mitchell was on the block. I think the Ravens having Keaton Mitchell on the block is a mistake. I think he's a guy that, because listen, I've said this before, I've said this repeatedly, right? I think the Ravens are taking off Derrick Henry too much off the field when it comes to third down, just to have Justice Hill on the field because he can pass block and things like that. Derrick Henry can pass block. Derrick Henry can catch the football. You're taking him off the field too much. It's 3rd and 2, 3rd and 1. Derrick Henry should be on the field, right? Because at least you give the illusion of could be a run, right? But even taking out that factor, right? Say you want to rotate Derrick Henry out of the game. To me, Justice Hill hasn't done enough to keep Mitchell on the bench. Justice Hill has not been very good. You take away the one long big run he had versus Kansas City at that point where it didn't really matter. He's been mediocre. Right, so the Ravens trading or potentially trading Keaton Mitchell, I just don't see I don't see the appeal of it. I don't see the necessity for it. It doesn't make sense to me, to be quite honest. But he could be on the block. I know a lot of fans want to see Marlon Humphrey and Mark Andrews traded, things like that. I don't think Marlon's going anywhere. Mark Andrews, I don't know. There are some teams that need a tight end, but would the Ravens be willing to make that trade during the season? I don't, especially with Isaiah Likely hasn't really gotten going so far to start this year, right? He's just coming back, but he hasn't really gotten going. So I can't, like I said, I can't really see the Ravens being big time sellers. I really can't. I mean, listen, the Odafe Oweh trade surprised us all. Well, caught us off guard, I would say, but I don't know if they're gonna make another move like that. They very well could, but I just don't see it crystal clear, right? So even trading Keith Mitchell, even hearing his name being in rumors was surprising to me, to be quite honest with you, right? But anyway, now a couple of most of this is just going to be defensive players, right? But there is one player on the offensive line that is playing for a bad team that the Ravens are familiar with that I would love to see them potentially get back, and that's Kevin Zeitler, right? Kevin Zeitler, right guard. We know Kevin Zeitler was with the Ravens for a multitude of years, right? Gave them high level play, Pro Bowl level kind of play, and since he has left, they've had Dan Flurley in the position. Now, that to me, that's the main blocker of this trade right now. Kevin Zeitler is 35 years old. The Titans are 1-6, no, 1-5, excuse me, something like that. So they're bad. They're rebuilding. They don't have a good offensive line. So are they going to take away one of their only, established pieces in front of their rookie quarterback? Possibly not. But Kevin Zeitler could one out of there. Who knows, right? But the Ravens, to me, that's a guy that makes sense for this team. They should be looking at a guy like Kevin Zeitler because there aren't going to be a large market of offensive linemen that are starting caliber that's going to be available because teams are going to keep those guys, right? So Zeitler to me is in a unique position, being an older guy. For one, he probably wants to play for a team that has a chance to win. So all those kind of factors, right? Now, like I said, the biggest thing in the way is that the Ravens are dead set and determined on playing Dan Flurley. I'm not going to spend too much time bashing them and things like that. I know a lot of people are up in arms about George Warhops. He had his presser and he talked about, well, I don't really see anything wrong with Flurley and Voorhees. I don't like the statement because people are like, well, you can't expect their coach to bash them in public. There's a fine line between coddling and constructive criticism, right? George Warhop can say a lot of things in the media other than I don't really see any need for improvement from those two guys. He can say a lot of different things besides that, right? You don't have to coddle these guys in the media. You can't. They are professional. This is professional football. You can offer some constructive criticism in the media that's not tearing the guy down to the studs, right? You can do that. So I think he went too far on one side with that one, if you ask me. But that's the biggest impediment to stopping this, honestly, right? Now, the rest of the guys I'm going to talk about is going to be on the defensive side of the ball, right? So the Ravens clearly and very obviously need help with pass rush. So another guy is Arden Key, right? So Arden Key, 29 years old. He's a guy that the Ravens were interested in signing. It might have been 2 off seasons ago, and he ended up didn't end up playing for them, right? He's also on the Tennessee Titans as well. So like I said, Tennessee Titans 1-5, bad team, rebuilding. The Ravens had interest in Arden Key, and he's an outside linebacker that could potentially help this team, right? So now I'm not gonna say his stats are amazing this year, 1.5 sacks, things like that, but it's just the potential. It's just the fact that the Ravens had interest in this guy previously, right? They could look for him. He's probably not going to cost a lot in terms of a pick. You can get him for one of these. Ravens got like 4 or 5 5th-round picks next year. You probably get him for a 5th-round pick or even later than that, honestly. So that would make sense, right? Now, as far as the realistic bend, the two guys that I think there are better players than Arden Key. They both play for the same team. They both play for the Miami Dolphins, right? So that would be Bradley Chubb, and now to be Jalen Phillips, okay? So Bradley Chubb is 29 years old. He has 4 sacks this year, but Miami's in disarray right now. Tua's calling all his teammates in the media saying guys are not showing up for meetings, this and that. Mike McDaniel had to apologize on behalf of Tua. The Tua came out and apologized today. It's a lot going on in Miami, right? And they could be looking to be sellers when it comes to this trade deadline and things like that, right? So Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips are 2 guys I'd love to see the Ravens at least sniff around and possibly bring one of these guys in. And Jalen Phillips, 26 years old, only has 1 sack this year. But pretty much the same thing I said about Bradley Chubb, right? Now, the thing about both of these guys that is very, very concerning is they do have a very concerning injury history, right? Jalen Phillips has been on the brink of retirement before. He's only 26 years old because of his injury history. Bradley Chubb, I believe 2024, he missed the entire year because of an injury he suffered in that previous year, right? So these are guys that it is a risk, right? But that could also be a game for the Ravens in the sense that they won't have to give a lot to get these guys onto the team, right? So this is just like the offensive line conversation, right? There's not going to be too many surefire impact players available for the Ravens just to go scoop up, right? So you're going to have to get creative. You're going to have to think about guys that come with some risk. That it might not work out, but you cannot go forward with this outside linebacker room how it is currently, especially with the fact that Tavius Robinson is going to be down for a month and a half, 2 months, right? Listen, I'm grateful that it's not a season-ending injury for Tavis Robinson. But right now, we're in October. You're telling me we're not going to get him back until December, and the Ravens needed another edge rusher when he was healthy. They need two edge rushers right now, minimum, right? So when I look at it, the Ravens have to make a move, right? It's not will they make a move? They have to do something, right? I thought they might sign Drake Jackson. He ended up going to another team. Ended up claiming him, or not claiming him, but ended up signing him. That I thought the Ravens were really going to pursue him heavily. Let me see what team he went to, because that's going to be in my mind. The Commanders. The Commanders ended up snapping him up, right? So I thought the Ravens were going to be aggressive going after him. Former second round pick. Not saying he's lighting the world on fire, but he is a second round pass rusher with talent, right? Former second round pass rusher with talent. I thought the Ravens would be really aggressive going after him. They really weren't. So that's that, right? But the Ravens right now, when I'm looking at the edge room, is nowhere near enough. Like I said, it wasn't enough when Tavis Robinson was healthy and ready to go. So with him being hurt down for 2 months, is definitely not enough now. So the Ravens have to do something. All right. Now listen, there's guys on the practice squad that they could bring up. Like I'm a fan of K'Mon Rucker. I think he's a very strong, very destructive kind of edge rusher, right? I was about to compare him to somebody, but I don't want to throw it out there to make it sound like I'm saying he's that guy. But when I was thinking about it, it kind of reminds me of the guy that Ravens just played, which is Jared Verse, right? Because he's really, really powerful. He'll run through you, right? We're not all about this finesse moves, things like that. He could probably do that, but his power is what really sticks out. So I think the Ravens need some of that on the edge, right? That's what I'll be looking for. I know the Ravens are going to, like I said, they could do it from within. Malik Ham is on the practice squad. I mentioned K'Mon Rucker, but I think you need some experience, veteran talent that you're not hoping for production, the guys that have had production before in the past. The Ravens need to make that kind of move, in my humble opinion, right? So that's what I'm looking for. So those are kind of the realistic options, right? Kevin Zeitler, Arden Key, Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips. Now, the dream scenario, the guys that I would say that, are really up there high on the list, but I don't see happening, that would be Jeffrey Simmons and that would be Dexter Lawrence, right? So Jeffrey Simmons for the Tennessee Titans, ideal impact player, right? 28 years old, 4.5 sacks, 8 TFLs, 11 quarterback hits. But besides Cam Ward, he's really the anchor for what the Titans have going on right now on that team, right? He's one of their cornerstone pieces, right? So if they trade Jeffrey Simmons, they're already in a rebuild, but that kind of says like, hey, we're completely done. We're starting almost all the way over, right? So I don't know if they'll trade him per se. And the Ravens are going to have to give up assets, which they don't want to give up. That's one of my biggest things with Eric DeCosta and the Ravens, that they hoard assets a little bit too much, right? Them striking the deal to get Roquan Smith, I was shocked because that's not something typically the Ravens would do, to give up that high of a draft pick. Now, to get a guy like Jeffrey Simmons, they'll have to do that again, all right, for the Tennessee Titans. So I don't know if they will do that. Probably not. But if you want to talk about number one ideal candidate, he's the guy, right? Him being a disruptive force in the middle with Nani Madubuike, pretty much I'm going to call him done for the year, right? As you already know. So you replace that in the middle of the defense. That's also going to help your edge rushers, because now the middle of the offensive line has to worry about Jeffrey Simmons. Had to focus on, had to double team him. Now you got to worry about you can't double team him. Now Travis Jones is 1-on-1, right? Now the edge rushers have more opportunities, all right? So having a guy in the middle, even though he's not an edge rusher, right? Having a guy in the middle can disrupt the entire offensive line. And Jeffrey Simmons, to me, is that ideal guy for the Ravens to go out there and target. Do I think it will happen? No. All right. The other guy, like I said, was Dexter Lawrence. Dexter Lawrence is 28 years old. Another guy, ideal impact player. Now he's not having a ton of stats this year, but he is a defensive tackle, those type of kind of guy, right? He has an interception which he almost took back to the house, 1 TFL, 2 QB hits, but it's more about his impact in the middle of the park, right? The Ravens played a lot better versus the Rams. I think the Rams, I said this before, I said this in the game recap. The Rams left a lot of plays on the field, dropped passes, dropped touchdowns, missed throws from Stafford, penalties, all those kind of things. So the score could have been a lot worse, right? But I will give the Ravens credit that they looked more competitive. The Rams didn't run the ball as easily and things like that. But if you had a guy like Dexter Lawrence in the middle of your defense, you can solidify a lot of those things. But the Giants are kind of rolling. Jackson Dart is giving them a new life, a new energy. I don't see them trading him right now, just because, like I said, the Giants, they have life. Him, Jackson Dart, Scatterbo, they feeling good about life, right? So I don't think that that trade is going to happen either. But if there was two guys on the defensive side of the ball, I would say, okay, the Ravens really need to target Jeffrey Simmons, Dexter Lawrence, right? I know a lot of Ravens fans are looking at Max Crosby. Not happening, all right? One, contract is too big. And then on top of that, the Raiders are just not trading him. Max Crosby will probably be a Raider until he decides no longer he wants to be that. So I just don't see that happening. That's my honest opinion on that. So that's why I look at Jeffrey Simmons, Dexter Lawrence. But even those guys is up in the air, right? So those are kind of my trade targets. Those are my ideas. The Ravens need help on the defensive side of the ball. Unfortunately, they need help on the offensive line. But as it stands, when you listen to George Warhawk, the offensive line coach, speak, when you listen to John Harbaugh speak, Voorhees and Falele are going to be starters unless somebody gets injured, right? And I don't wish injury on nobody, so I'm not wishing injuries on those guys at all right? So unless something changes to their health, those guys are going to play. All right, Ravens they're not going to look at a Corey Bullock off the bench, Ben Cleveland off the bench. No. Falele, Voorhees, you're in the game. So we got to deal with that, right? So the Ravens, what they could do is they have to add pass rushers, whether it's interior or edge guys, some point in the next month. They have to add some guys. So those are my guys, man. Give me your guys in the comments. But it's Gabriel to the Fan TV. I'm out.